I pushed open the stable door, and what I saw made my heart stop beating. Sunlight cut through the cracks in the weathered planks, falling in dusty beams across the hay-strewn floor. In one of those beams sat a girl, maybe 20 years old, knees pulled tight to her chest. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, filthy with dirt and straw. Her bare legs were covered in bruises, shades of yellow and purple that hadn't had time to fade. She flinched when my shadow fell across her face, like she expected the next blow to come from me. I stood there in the doorway of Tobias Fletcher's stable, hat in my hands, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I had come here to look at a horse, an Appaloosa gelding Tobias had told me about 3 days ago when he stopped by my ranch. I needed a breeding stallion for next spring. That's all I came for, just a horse. But what I found was something else entirely. The girl didn't speak. She just stared at me with eyes that had gone somewhere far away, somewhere I couldn't reach. I noticed the iron ring bolted into the wall behind her. I noticed the chain lying in the straw, maybe 3 feet long. I noticed the marks on her wrists where the metal had rubbed the skin raw. Then I saw the wooden post beside her. 3 shallow cuts carved into it with a knife. Not random scratches. 3 marks, evenly spaced, deliberate. My name is Nathaniel Garrison. Most folks call me Nate. I'm 44 years old, and I run a horse ranch about 5 miles east of Abilene, Kansas. It's summer now, 1883, and the heat sits on this land like a heavy hand, the kind of heat that makes men mean and horses skittish. I'm not a complicated man. I wake up before dawn. I feed my horses. I mend fences. I watch the sun go down from my porch. That's been my life for the past 4 years, ever since my wife Rachel died. But standing in that stable, looking at that girl with the chain and the bruises and those 3 marks on the post, I knew my simple life was about to get a whole lot more complicated. The girl's lips moved. No sound came out at first. She swallowed hard, tried again. 3 words, barely a whisper. My father, 3 times a day. Her eyes flicked toward the wooden post, toward those 3 cuts in the timber. Morning, midday, night. I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger, though that would come later. What I felt was shame. Because I had known Tobias Fletcher for 15 years. We weren't friends exactly, but we were neighborly. He sold horses, same as me, though his operation was smaller, scrappier. He spent more time at the card tables in town than he did on his land. I knew his wife Helen had died 4 years back. Same year, I lost Rachel. Folks said it was a fall down the stairs, a terrible accident. Tobias had played the grieving widower well enough. No one questioned it. And I knew he had a daughter. Lydia, I think her name was. I'd never met her. Tobias always said she was sickly, that she didn't get out much. He said it with a shake of his head and a kind of resigned sadness that made people nod and change the subject. But what I was looking at in that stable wasn't sickness. It was captivity. The heat inside the stable felt thicker than the air outside. Sweat ran down my back. A horse shifted in one of the stalls, snorting soft. Flies buzzed in the corners where the light didn't reach. The girl watched me, waiting, just waiting to see which kind of man I was, the kind who walks away or the kind who stays. Boots crunched on gravel outside, heavy footsteps coming around from the side of the barn. Tobias Fletcher was coming back. I had maybe 10 seconds to make a choice, walk out of that stable like I'd seen nothing. Get on my horse and ride back to my ranch and forget that girl with the chain and the bruises. Mind my own business like any sensible man would do, or I could step between a father and his daughter and start a fight that might not end well for anyone. I'd learned that lesson the hard way, to believe what I was told instead of what I saw. Rachel had bruises sometimes. She said she fell. She said she was clumsy. And I believed her because it was easier than asking questions I didn't want answered. Then Rachel died, fell down the stairs in our own house while I was out in the south pasture mending fence. By the time I found her, she was already gone. I told myself it was an accident, told myself there was nothing I could have done, Told myself that every morning when I stood at her grave and read a line from the Bible she'd loved. But deep down, in the parts of myself I didn't like to examine, I knew I had failed her. I wasn't about to fail again. I took off my hat slowly, held it in both hands, looked at the girl and spoke quiet. "I'm going to get you out of here." The stable door swung open behind me. Tobias Fletcher stepped inside carrying a bucket of water from the well. He was a lean man, about 50, with gray stubble on his jaw and eyes that were a little too bright, a little too sharp. The kind of eyes that saw everything and calculated its worth. He set the bucket down when he saw me standing there. His face didn't change much, just a small tightening around the mouth. "Nate Garrison," he said. "Didn't hear you ride up." I didn't answer right away, just stood there blocking his view of the girl, not aggressive, not challenging, just present. Tobias wiped his hands on his pants. He smiled, but it was the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "She gets dramatic when it's hot," he said, nodding toward the girl like she was a piece of furniture. "Girls got wild streaks sometimes. You know how it is." "I don't know how it is," I said, "because I don't lock people in stables." Tobias's smile thinned. "She runs off. I keep her close." "That's just good parenting, Nate. You wouldn't understand. You never had kids." The words hit like he meant them to, and he was right. Rachel and I never had children. She got pregnant twice, lost both babies before they could draw breath. It hollowed something out in her. Hollowed something out in me, too. But that didn't mean I didn't know wrong when I saw it. "Your daughter is chained to a wall," I said. Tobias shrugged. "Temporary measure. Like I said, she runs. I'll hire her," I said. "Need an extra hand at my place for the season. I'll pay fair wages. She can stay in my guest room. Respectable arrangement." Tobias's eyes narrowed. "She ain't for hire. She ain't livestock either." That did it. Something snapped behind Tobias's eyes. He took 2 quick steps toward me, fists already coming up. I'm not a young man. Not quick like I used to be, but I'm steady. I've broken horses and built fences and hauled timber in heat and cold for 25 years. My hands know work. Tobias swung wild. His first punch caught my shoulder, knocked me back a step. The second never landed. I caught his wrist, twisted, drove him sideways into the stable wall. The whole structure shook. Dust rained down from the rafters. A horse kicked hard in its stall. Tobias tried to knee me. I shoved him back into a feed barrel. He stumbled, caught himself, came at me again. Then the girl moved. Not much, just enough. She grabbed a handful of straw and flung it into Tobias's face. It wasn't heroic. It was desperate. But it was enough to make him pause, sputtering and cursing. I reached for the latchkey hanging from a nail on the wall, unlocked the stall door. The chain fell away from the iron ring with a dull clank. Tobias coughed, wiping straw from his eyes. He started to rise. I stepped between him and the girl. "If I hear you've laid a hand on her again," I said, "I'll come back with the law, and I won't come alone." Tobias looked at me with pure hatred, but he didn't move. The girl stood up slow. She was taller than I expected, thin but not frail. She moved like someone who'd learned to make herself small. I walked her out of that stable and into the sunlight. My wagon was hitched near the front gate. I helped her up onto the bench seat, gave her an old canvas coat to wrap around her shoulders even though the day was warm. She needed something to hold on to. Tobias stood in the yard, watching us. He didn't shout, didn't threaten, just stood there with his arms crossed and his face blank. That scared me more than his fists had. A man like Tobias Fletcher doesn't let go of what he thinks belongs to him, not without a fight. And I had a feeling the real fight was just beginning. I clicked the reins. The horses started forward. We rolled out of Tobias Fletcher's yard and onto the road that led back toward my ranch. The girl didn't look back, not even once. We crossed the Arkansas River at a shallow bend where the water ran clear over smooth stones. The wagon wheels ground slow through the current. Late afternoon sun turned the river gold. I didn't ask her name yet, didn't ask her questions. She'd been asked enough, I figured, forced to answer enough. She could speak when she was ready. By the time the sun started leaning west, my ranch came into view. Garrison Ranch. Just a house, a barn, a stable, some paddocks. Not much, but it was mine. Had been my father's before me, would have been my son's after me if things had gone different. I pulled the wagon up to the house, helped the girl down. She stood in the yard looking around like she couldn't quite believe where she was. "You're safe here," I told her. She nodded, but her eyes went distant, like she was already counting the hours. That first evening, when the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched long across the land, I noticed the girl stiffen. She was sitting on the porch steps where I'd told her she could rest. Her whole body went rigid. Her breathing got shallow. It was one of the hours. One of the 3 times. I didn't say anything, just walked over and asked if she'd help me carry feed out to the horses. Something to do, something to keep moving. Break the clock that was ticking in her head. She followed me to the barn. We filled buckets with oats and walked them out to the paddock. The horses came over, gentle and curious. One of them, an old mare named Sadie, nuzzled the girl's hand. For just a second, I saw her smile. When the moment passed and no one came through a locked door, when the hour went by and nothing terrible happened, something small shifted in her shoulders. Not trust, not yet. But maybe a crack in the fear. I made supper that night, nothing fancy, beans and cornbread and coffee. We ate at the table in the kitchen. The girl barely touched her food, but she drank the coffee slow, holding the cup in both hands like it was something precious. After supper, I showed her to the guest room. It had been Rachel's sewing room before she died. I'd cleaned it out years ago, but the curtains were still the ones Rachel had made, blue calico with tiny white flowers. "You can lock the door from the inside," I told her, "if that makes you feel safer." The girl looked at the lock, then at me, then back at the lock. "Thank you," she said. First words she'd spoken since we left Tobias's place. Her voice was rough, like it hadn't been used much. I nodded and left her alone. I went out to the porch and sat in the chair I always sat in. The same chair I'd sat in every night for 4 years. From here I could see the 3 graves up on the hill, behind the house, Rachel Garrison, beloved wife, and 2 small stones beside hers, no names on them, just dates, the 2 babies we'd lost. I used to go up there every morning, stand at those graves and read from Rachel's Bible and tell myself I was honoring her memory, but really I was just counting the days since I'd failed her, counting the weight of my guilt. Tonight, I didn't go up to the graves. I just sat on the porch and looked at them from a distance. Inside the house, I heard the guest room door close, heard the lock click into place. I thought about that girl in there, Lydia. That was her name. I remembered now, Lydia Fletcher. I thought about the 3 marks on the post in Tobias's stable, the count of her suffering, and I thought about Rachel, about the bruises I'd seen and ignored, about the lies I'd believed because believing was easier than knowing. The night settled in around me. Crickets sang in the grass. Somewhere out in the darkness, a coyote called. I had questions that needed answering, about Tobias Fletcher, about what he'd done to his daughter, about what might have happened to his wife Helen. But those questions would have to wait until morning. For tonight, all I could do was sit on my porch and hope that bringing Lydia here had been the right choice. Hope that this time I wouldn't fail. I woke up before dawn like always. Old habits don't break easy. I dressed quiet and went outside to start the day's work. The air was cool, almost pleasant. In an hour it would be hot again, but for now it was good. I fed the horses first, checked their water, mucked out the stalls, normal work. The kind that keeps your hands busy and your mind from wandering too far. But my mind wandered anyway. It wandered to the guest room where Lydia was sleeping, or trying to. It wandered to Tobias Fletcher's ranch and what he might be planning. And it wandered, like it always did, to the 3 graves on the hill. Rachel had been gone 4 years. 4 years of waking up alone. 4 years of cooking for one. 4 years of trying to figure out what I was supposed to do with the rest of my life. I'd gotten good at routine. Routine didn't ask questions. Routine didn't demand answers. But routine had just been broken by a girl with bruises and a chain around her ankle. When the sun came up full, I went back to the house to make breakfast. Lydia was already in the kitchen. She'd changed into one of Rachel's old dresses that I'd left folded on a chair in the guest room. It fit her well enough. She'd washed her face and tied her hair back. She looked different in the morning light. Younger, more fragile. "Morning," I said. "Good morning, Mr. Garrison. Just Nate is fine." She nodded but didn't say my name, like she wasn't ready for that kind of familiarity yet. I made eggs and bacon, toast from the bread I'd baked 2 days ago. We ate in silence. Not the heavy kind of silence that presses down on you, just the quiet of two people who didn't know each other yet, sitting at the same table. After breakfast, I told her I needed to ride into town. Had some business to take care of. She could stay here if she wanted, lock the doors, or she could come with me. "I'll stay," she said. I nodded. Gave her a list of things she could do if she wanted to keep busy. Mending. Weeding the garden. Reading. Rachel's books were still on the shelf in the parlor. "But you don't have to do anything," I told her. "You can just rest." She looked at me like she didn't understand the concept of rest. "I'll keep busy," she said. I saddled my horse, an old roan gelding named Duke, and rode toward Abilene. It was about an hour's ride. The land between my ranch and town was flat and open, covered in prairie grass that moved like water in the wind. I had time to think on that ride, time to turn things over in my mind. Tobias Fletcher had locked his daughter in a stable, chained her like an animal, marked the days of her suffering on a wooden post. Why? Men did terrible things for all kinds of reasons. Cruelty, control, madness. But Tobias didn't strike me as mad. He struck me as calculated, a man who thought through his actions. So what did he gain from keeping Lydia locked up? I thought about Helen Fletcher, Tobias's wife, dead 4 years, same year Rachel died. Fell down the stairs, people said. Tragic accident, same words they'd used for Rachel. My hands tightened on the reins. I rode into Abilene just after 9 in the morning. The town was waking up slow, shops opening, folks sweeping their stoops, a wagon rattling past with a load of lumber. I tied Duke to the hitching post outside the sheriff's office and went inside. Sheriff Marcus Donovan was sitting at his desk, boots propped up, hat tipped back. He was reading a newspaper and drinking coffee from a tin cup. He looked up when I came in. "Nate Garrison," he said. "Don't usually see you in town on a weekday." "Got something to report," I said. Marcus gestured to a chair. I sat down. Told him the whole thing. About going to Tobias Fletcher's place to look at a horse. About finding Lydia locked in the stable. About the chain and the bruises and the 3 marks on the post. Marcus listened without interrupting. When I finished, he set his coffee down and rubbed his jaw. "You stepped into something," he said. "I know." Marcus leaned forward. His face was serious now. "Tobias filed a complaint this morning," he said, "before you even got here. Says you kidnapped his daughter. Says you rode onto his property and took her by force." "I didn't take her by force," I said. "I gave her a choice. She chose to leave. That's not how Tobias tells it." I felt my jaw tighten. "Where's the law in this, Marcus?" Marcus sighed. He was 55 years old. Had been sheriff for near about 20 years. He was a fair man, mostly. Did his job by the book. But I knew something about Marcus that most folks didn't. I knew he'd had a wife once, Abigail. She'd died 15 years back. Fell off her horse, the story went. Broke her neck. But there'd been whispers, quiet talk. The kind of talk that dies down after a while because no one wants to stir up trouble. Abigail Donovan had bruises sometimes. People had seen them. Marcus had never remarried. Lived alone in a small house on the edge of town. Kept to himself outside of his work. I wondered if Marcus saw something in my story that reminded him of his own. "In this county," Marcus said carefully, "a father still has legal rights over his daughter until she marries or comes of age. Lydia Fletcher is 20 years old, not yet married. That means legally she's under her father's authority. Even if he's hurting her?" Marcus's face tightened. "Even then, unless she testifies against him, and even if she does, it's her word against his. He stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the street. Tobias Fletcher has friends in this town, Marcus said. Men who owe him favors, men who'll stand with him. What are you saying? I'm saying be careful, Nate. You did the right thing bringing her out of there, but this won't be easy. I stood up too, thanked Marcus for his time, started to leave. Nate, Marcus said. I turned back. I'll do what I can, he said. Within the law. I nodded. That was all I could ask for. I rode back to the ranch thinking about what Marcus had said, about how the law didn't always protect the people who needed it most, about how sometimes the law itself became a chain. When I got home, Lydia was in the garden pulling weeds. She'd found Rachel's old gardening gloves and a wide-brimmed hat. She looked up when I rode in. Everything all right? She asked. I told her the truth. Told her Tobias had filed a complaint. Told her what Marcus had said about the law. She didn't seem surprised, just nodded like she'd expected it. He won't stop, she said. My father, he never stops. We went inside. I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table. Lydia, I said, I need to ask you something, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but I need to understand what's happening here. She looked at me with those steady eyes. Did your father do this because of something specific, I asked, or has it always been this way? She was quiet for a long time. So long I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she spoke. My mother died 4 years ago, she said. They said she fell down the stairs, but I saw the bruises on her neck. Bruises that looked like fingers. My chest went cold. You think your father killed her? I know he did, Lydia said. Her voice was steady. No tears, just certainty. I was upstairs when it happened. I heard them arguing, heard her scream, heard something heavy fall. When I came down, she was at the bottom of the stairs, and my father was standing over her. Did you tell anyone? Who would believe me? A daughter accusing her father? I wanted to argue. To tell her people would have listened, but I knew better. I knew how these things worked. Why did he lock you up? I asked. She looked down at her hands. My mother left me land, she said. A piece of property by the river. Good land, worth money. She inherited it from her family before she married my father. It was supposed to come to me when I turned 21. That's next year. Yes. Lydia's jaw tightened. 2 months ago, my father told me I needed to sign papers. Transfer the land to him. Said it was for safekeeping. I refused. That's when he started locking me in the stable. 3 times a day. He'd come in and ask if I was ready to sign. I'd say no. He'd leave me there. For how long? Hours. Sometimes half a day. And the marks on the post? I made those, she said, to count, to remember, to have something to hold on to. I sat back in my chair, felt the weight of it settling on me. This wasn't just about cruelty. This was about money, about control, about a man who'd killed his wife and was now trying to break his daughter. I'm not signing, Lydia said. Her voice was hard now. I don't care what he does to me. That land was my mother's. It's all I have left of her. You don't have to sign anything, I told her. We'll figure this out. But even as I said it, I wasn't sure how. That evening, after supper, I went to my study. It was a small room off the kitchen where I kept my accounts and Rachel's things I hadn't been able to put away. On the bottom shelf was a wooden box. Inside the box was a leather journal, Rachel's journal. I'd found it after she died, tucked under the mattress on her side of the bed. On the cover, in her careful handwriting, it said, "For Nathaniel, the truth you need to hear." I'd never opened it. 4 years, and I'd never once cracked that cover. Because I was afraid of what Rachel might have written, afraid of the truth I'd been too blind to see when she was alive. But tonight, with Lydia in the guest room and Tobias Fletcher's threat hanging over us, I couldn't avoid it anymore. I sat down at my desk, lit the lamp, opened the journal. Rachel's handwriting filled the first page, neat and precise. The way she'd written everything, June 14th, 1879, the day before she died. My dearest Nathaniel, she wrote, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. I need to tell you something I should have said while I was alive. I was not alone in my suffering. My hands started shaking. There was another woman, Rachel continued, who shared my secret. Her name was Helen Fletcher. We met at church. We both carried the same bruises, the same shame. We were too afraid to speak. Helen Fletcher, Tobias's wife. I read on, my heart pounding. Helen told me about her husband, about his temper, about how he wanted her land. She was terrified he would kill her. I told her about my own situation, about the man who hurt me. We promised each other we would find a way out, but we ran out of time. Nathaniel, if you ever meet Helen's daughter Lydia, please protect her. Do not let her end up like us. Do not let silence win. I love you. I always have. Please forgive yourself for what you did not know. Your loving wife, Rachel. The journal fell from my hands onto the desk. Rachel had known about Helen Fletcher. They'd been friends, allies in their suffering, and Rachel had asked me to protect Lydia. 4 years ago, I'd failed Rachel, failed to see what was right in front of me, but I'd found Lydia, and I'd brought her here. Maybe, just maybe, I could keep this one promise. I sat there in that study for a long time. The lamp burned low. Outside, the night insects sang their endless song. Finally, I closed the journal, put it back in the box, stood up. I walked out to the porch. The sky was clear, full of stars. The 3 graves on the hill were dark shapes against the horizon. Rachel, I said to the night, I heard you. I'm going to do what you asked. The wind moved through the grass. Somewhere far off, a coyote howled, and I stood there on my porch, a man who'd lost everything, trying to figure out how to save someone who still had a chance. The next morning, Sheriff Marcus Donovan rode up to my ranch just after dawn. I was in the stable when I heard his horse. I came out to meet him. Marcus looked tired, like he hadn't slept. Nate, he said, we need to talk. I nodded toward the house. We went inside. I poured coffee. Lydia was still asleep in the guest room. Marcus sat down at the kitchen table and took off his hat. I did some checking, he said, about Tobias Fletcher. And? Marcus pulled out a folded paper from his pocket, unfolded it on the table. This is a property deed, he said, dated 3 years ago. Transfers ownership of a piece of land along the Arkansas River from Helen Fletcher to Tobias Fletcher. That's the land Lydia told me about. Marcus nodded. Thing is, the signature looks wrong. I compared it to other documents Helen signed. It doesn't match. Tobias forged it. Looks that way. But proving it is another matter. Where does that leave us? Marcus rubbed his face. He looked older than his 55 years. Nate, I'm going to tell you something I shouldn't, he said. 20 years ago, when I first became sheriff, there was a woman named Iris Caldwell. She was married to Tobias Fletcher. This was before Helen. I didn't know Tobias had been married before. Most folks don't remember. It was a long time ago. Marcus's voice got quiet. Iris died in an accident. Fell off a ladder in their barn. Broke her neck. Another fall, I said. Marcus nodded. I was new to the job. Didn't know what to look for. Ruled it an accident. Case closed. But now you're thinking it wasn't. Now I'm thinking I made a mistake. Marcus looked me in the eye. I'm thinking Tobias Fletcher has been killing women for a long time. And I'm thinking I let him get away with it because I didn't ask the right questions. We sat there in silence for a minute, the weight of old failures hanging between us. What are you going to do? I asked. I'm going to reopen the investigation into Iris Caldwell's death, Marcus said, and I'm going to look into Helen Fletcher's death too. But Nate, that's going to take time. And Tobias isn't going to sit still while I dig into his past. He's going to come after Lydia. Marcus nodded. That's why I'm here, to warn you. Keep her close. Keep your doors locked. And if Tobias shows up, you come get me. Don't try to handle it yourself. I promised I would. Marcus stood up to leave. At the door, he paused. There's something else you should know, he said. There's an old woman living about 10 miles east of here. Name's Adelaide Mercer. She used to work as a clerk at the courthouse 20 years ago. She might remember things about Iris Caldwell's case. You think she'd talk to me? I think she's been waiting 20 years for someone to ask the right questions. After Marcus left, I stood on the porch and watched him ride away. The sun was coming up full now, burning off the morning cool. Inside, I heard Lydia moving around in the guest room, getting dressed. In a few minutes, she'd come out and we'd have breakfast and start another day. But I knew now that this wasn't just about protecting one girl from her father. This was about something bigger, something that had roots going back 20 years or more. This was about breaking a cycle of violence that had claimed at least 3 women's lives: Rachel, Helen, Iris, and maybe others I didn't know about yet. I thought about the 3 marks on the post in Tobias's stable. 3 marks, 3 women, 3 lives that had ended in silence and lies. But Lydia was still alive, and she was under my roof. And I'd made a promise to Rachel that I intended to keep. Whatever was coming, I'd face it. Because this time, I wasn't going to fail. This time, the silence was going to break. 1 week had passed since I brought Lydia home. 7 days of quiet routine that felt like holding your breath underwater, waiting for something to break the surface. Lydia settled into the rhythm of ranch life easier than I expected. She helped with the morning feeding, tended the garden Rachel had planted years ago, cooked meals that filled the house with smells I'd forgotten. She was careful around me, always keeping a polite distance, but the raw fear in her eyes had started to fade. She slept with her door locked. I heard her walking the floors some nights, pacing back and forth until exhaustion finally pulled her under. But she never complained, never asked for anything. She was learning to exist without counting the hours. On the 8th day, I found her sitting on the porch at sunset. She'd taken to spending that time of day there, watching the light change across the prairie. I sat down in my chair a few feet away. We didn't speak for a long time. The silence between us had changed. It wasn't the heavy silence of strangers anymore. It was something else. Something almost comfortable. Finally, without looking at me, Lydia spoke. "Do you think broken people can be whole again, Mr. Garrison?" I thought about that question, thought about Rachel and the 4 years I'd spent trying to piece myself back together after losing her. "I don't know, Lydia," I said, "but I think we can learn to live with the cracks. And maybe that's enough." She turned to look at me then. Her eyes were wet, but she didn't cry. "My mother used to say that," she said, "that broken things could still be beautiful. Like a mended cup that holds water just as well as a new one. Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman." She was. Lydia looked back out at the horizon. "Until my father broke her so badly she couldn't be mended. We sat there until the sun went down and the first stars came out. Then Lydia stood up, thanked me for the day, and went inside to her locked room. I stayed on the porch a while longer, thinking about broken things and whether they could ever really be made whole. The next morning, I woke to find 2 of my horses dead in the paddock. They were lying on their sides, foam dried around their mouths. My breeding stallion and one of my best mares. Both young, both healthy the day before. I knelt beside them in the early morning light and saw the truth immediately. Poison. Someone had mixed something into their feed, something that killed them slow and painful in the night. I found boot prints in the soft dirt near the feed shed. Not mine. Bigger. Deeper. Someone had been here while we slept. Lydia came out of the house and saw me standing over the dead horses. Her face went pale. "He's starting," she said. Her voice was flat, empty. "My father. This is how it begins." I looked at those dead horses, animals I'd raised from foals, and felt rage burn hot in my chest. But I kept it locked down. Anger without purpose was just noise. "Stay inside today," I told Lydia. "Keep the doors locked. I'm going into town." She didn't argue, just nodded and went back to the house. I rode Duke hard toward Abilene. I needed help, needed someone who understood what we were up against. Marcus had mentioned a name, Adelaide Mercer, an old woman who used to work at the courthouse 20 years ago, someone who might remember things about Tobias Fletcher's first wife. I stopped at the general store and asked the clerk where I could find Adelaide Mercer. He gave me directions to a small house on the eastern edge of town, past the church. The house was neat but worn, paint peeling in places, garden overgrown. I tied Duke to the fence post and knocked on the door. A woman opened it. She was maybe 65, with gray hair pulled back tight and sharp blue eyes that took my measure in one glance. "You're Nathaniel Garrison," she said. Not a question. "Yes, ma'am. I've been expecting you." She stepped aside. "Come in." The inside of the house was dim and cool. Books lined the walls, papers stacked on every surface. The home of someone who lived more in her mind than in the world. Adelaide gestured to a chair. I sat. She poured me tea from a pot on the stove without asking if I wanted it. "You found Tobias Fletcher's daughter," she said, sitting down across from me. "Brought her to your ranch. Now he's coming after you. How do you know that?" Adelaide smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Because I know Tobias Fletcher. I know exactly what kind of man he is. I worked for him 20 years ago, before I knew better." She set her teacup down and looked at me with those sharp eyes. "I need to tell you about a woman named Iris Caldwell," she said, "and about the mistake I made that got her killed." Adelaide's story came out slow, like pulling splinters from old wood. 20 years ago, she'd been a young clerk at the courthouse, fresh out of school, eager to make her way in the world. Tobias Fletcher had hired her to help manage property records for his horse trading business. Tobias was married then to a woman named Iris. She was the daughter of a wealthy rancher from the North County. Beautiful, educated. Too good for Tobias, everyone said, but love makes people blind. Iris had inherited land from her father, prime grazing land along the river. Tobias wanted that land titled in his name, for business purposes, he said. Easier to get loans, easier to expand. But Iris refused, said her father had left that land to her, and she intended to keep it in her name. Adelaide's hands tightened on her teacup. "Tobias asked me to forge documents," she said. "Transfer papers that would make it look like Iris had signed over the land willingly. I refused. I was young, but I wasn't a fool." "What did he do?" "He threatened my daughter." Adelaide's voice cracked. "I had a little girl then, 10 years old. Tobias told me if I didn't help him, something terrible would happen to her. An accident. Like the accidents that happen to disobedient wives. You did what he asked, I did what he asked." Adelaide looked down at her hands. "I forged Iris's signature, filed the papers. 3 weeks later, Iris Caldwell fell off a ladder in their barn and broke her neck. The sheriff ruled it an accident. Marcus Donovan was new to the job then. He didn't know what to look for. And I didn't tell him what I knew because I was terrified. Terrified for my daughter. Terrified for myself." "Where's your daughter now?" "She died of fever 10 years ago." Adelaide's eyes were dry but haunted. "I protected her from Tobias Fletcher, but I couldn't protect her from disease, so I lost her anyway. And I've spent the last 10 years wondering if I damned my soul for nothing." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of old sins heavy in the room. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because I can't save my daughter," Adelaide said. "But maybe I can help you save Lydia Fletcher. Maybe I can finally do something right." She stood up and went to a cabinet in the corner, pulled out a wooden box. Inside were papers, yellowed with age. "I kept copies," she said, "of the forged documents, of the original property records, evidence that Tobias Fletcher has been stealing from women for 20 years. She handed me the papers. I looked through them. Deeds, transfer documents, all with signatures that looked just slightly wrong. "This proves he forged Iris's signature," I said. "It proves more than that." Adelaide pulled out another paper. "This is a marriage certificate. Tobias Fletcher married Helen Merrick 6 months after Iris died. Helen was a widow. She owned a boarding house in town and a piece of land near the river. Let me guess. Tobias wanted that land too." Adelaide nodded. "And when Helen died 4 years ago, he got it. Along with the land that should have gone to Lydia." I felt pieces clicking together in my mind, a pattern emerging from the chaos. "How many women?" I asked. "That I know of?" 3. Iris, Helen, and there was another before Iris. A woman named Ruth Caldwell, Iris's cousin. She died 18 years ago, also an accident." My hands tightened on the papers. 3 women, all dead, all coincidentally married to Tobias Fletcher, all coincidentally wealthy. And now he wants Lydia's land, I said. Adelaide sat back down. She looked tired. Old. There's someone else you need to talk to, she said. A man named Caleb Whitmore. He's 72 now. Lives on a small farm about 10 miles east of here. He used to work for Tobias. He was there the night Iris died. He saw what happened? Adelaide nodded. But he never told anyone. Tobias threatened him, threatened his family. Caleb quit working for Tobias the next day and moved away. Came back 5 years ago after his wife and children died from fever. Lives alone now. Will he talk to me? I don't know. But he's the only witness still alive. If you can get him to testify, you might have a chance at stopping Tobias. I stood up, gathered the papers Adelaide had given me. Thank you, I said, for telling me the truth, even if it came late. Adelaide walked me to the door. At the threshold, she put a hand on my arm. Mr. Garrison, she said, Tobias Fletcher is a dangerous man. He's killed 3 women that we know of, maybe more. If you go after him, he'll come after you, and he'll come after Lydia. I know. Then why are you doing this? You barely know the girl. I thought about Rachel, about the journal she'd left me, about her last request. Because someone has to, I said, and because I made a promise. I rode back to the ranch with Adelaide's papers folded in my saddlebag and a new destination in mind. Tomorrow, I'd take Lydia with me to find Caleb Whitmore. I didn't want to leave her alone at the ranch, not with Tobias escalating. When I got home, Lydia was in the kitchen making bread. The smell filled the house, warm and comforting. I told her about Adelaide, about the forged documents, about Iris and Ruth, and the pattern of death that followed Tobias Fletcher like a shadow. Lydia listened without speaking. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. 3 women, she finally said. 3 women my father killed for land. Maybe 4, I said. Lydia looked at me sharply. My wife Rachel died 4 years ago, same time as your mother, same kind of accident. Lydia's eyes went wide. You think my father killed your wife? I don't know, but Rachel left me a journal. In it, she wrote about being friends with your mother, about sharing secrets. She asked me to protect you if anything happened to her. Lydia sat down hard in a chair. Her hands were shaking. Did your father ever come around our property, I asked, before Rachel died? Lydia thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. He came to buy a horse from you once, she said. I remember, because he came home angry, said you'd refused to sell to him. This was maybe a month before my mother died. My blood went cold. A month before Rachel died, Tobias had been at our ranch, had seen Rachel, had seen our land, had marked her as his next target. The pieces were falling into place now. Tobias had killed Rachel, thinking he could manipulate me into selling the ranch cheap as a grieving widower. But I'd held on to the land, stayed, didn't give him the opening he needed. So he'd moved on, back to his own daughter, the last piece of property he could claim. But Lydia had said no, had refused to sign, had become an obstacle, and Tobias didn't tolerate obstacles. That night, I sat in my study with Rachel's journal open in front of me. I read it all the way through this time, every page, every word. Rachel had been more perceptive than I'd given her credit for. She'd noticed things, strange visits from men I didn't know, offers to buy the ranch that seemed too eager, questions about land titles and inheritance laws. She'd suspected someone was circling our property like a wolf, but she hadn't known who. On the last page, written the day before she died, Rachel had added one more entry. A man came today while Nathaniel was in town. He asked about the ranch, about who would inherit if something happened to both of us. I didn't like his questions. I didn't like his eyes. I think his name was Fletcher. Tomorrow I will tell Nathaniel to be careful, to watch for this man. But tomorrow never came for Rachel. She'd fallen down our stairs that night, and I'd found her the next morning, already cold. I'd thought it was an accident, a terrible, random tragedy. But it wasn't random. It was murder, calculated and cold. Tobias Fletcher had killed my wife. I closed the journal and sat there in the dark, feeling rage and grief war inside me. But underneath both was something else, something colder, more focused, purpose. Tomorrow I'd find Caleb Whitmore. I'd get his testimony, and I'd make sure Tobias Fletcher finally paid for what he'd done, not just to Lydia, not just to Helen and Iris and Ruth, but to Rachel, to my wife. Morning came cold and gray, storm clouds gathering on the horizon, promising rain by afternoon. I told Lydia we were riding out to find Caleb Whitmore. She didn't argue, just nodded and changed into riding clothes. I saddled 2 horses, Duke for me and Sadie, the gentlest mare, for Lydia. She mounted up awkward at first, like she hadn't ridden in a long time, but muscle memory took over and she settled into the saddle. We rode east into country I didn't know well, flat prairie giving way to rolling hills covered in scrub oak and switchgrass. The wind picked up as we rode, carrying the smell of coming rain. After 2 hours we came to a small farmhouse set back from the road. The place looked tired, fence rails sagging, barn roof patched with mismatched boards, a single horse grazing in an overgrown paddock. An old hound dog barked as we rode up, more from duty than enthusiasm. The door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall but stooped, thin as a rail, with white hair and a face carved deep with lines. He had a rifle in his hands, not pointed at us, but ready. "Caleb Whitmore?" I called out. "Who's asking?" "My name is Nathaniel Garrison. This is Lydia Fletcher. We need to talk to you about Tobias Fletcher." The old man's face went pale. The rifle dipped. "I got nothing to say about him," Caleb said. "You best ride on." "Please," Lydia said. She urged Sadie forward a few steps. "Mr. Whitmore, my mother was Helen Fletcher. Before that, she was Helen Merrick." Caleb stared at Lydia. His hands started shaking on the rifle. "I knew your mother," he said quietly. "Good woman. I'm sorry for what happened to her." "Then help me," Lydia said. "Help me stop my father from hurting anyone else." Caleb looked between us, the struggle playing out plain on his face. Fear against conscience, self-preservation against doing what was right. Finally, he lowered the rifle. "Come inside," he said, "but I ain't promising nothing." The inside of Caleb's house was sparse. One room serving as kitchen, parlor, and bedroom. A pot-bellied stove, a narrow cot, a table with 2 chairs. The home of a man who'd given up on comfort long ago. Caleb made coffee with hands that still shook slightly. We sat at the table, the old hound curled up by the stove. "I don't talk about Tobias Fletcher," Caleb said. "Ain't talked about him in 18 years. Kept that promise to myself." "What happened 18 years ago?" I asked. Caleb took a long drink of his coffee, set the cup down, stared at it like he could see the past in the dark liquid. "I worked for Tobias back then," he said. "Tended his horses, kept his barn. I was younger, had a wife, 2 little boys, needed the work." He paused, swallowed hard. "Tobias was married to a woman named Iris Caldwell. Pretty thing, kind. She'd speak to me when she brought lunch out to the barn, treated me like a person, not just hired help. What happened to her?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "One night I was working late, fixing a stall door that had come loose. It was past dark. I heard shouting from the house, Tobias and Iris arguing. I tried not to listen. Wasn't my business. But then I heard Iris scream, not an angry scream, a scared scream." Caleb's hands clenched into fists on the table. "I ran toward the house," he said. "The front door was open. I could see inside to the staircase. Tobias was at the top. Iris was halfway down. They were struggling. She was trying to get away from him. And then Tobias pushed her." Caleb's voice broke. "I saw him do it. Saw him put both hands on her chest and shove. She fell backwards down those stairs, hit her head on the bottom step. I heard her neck break from where I was standing." Lydia made a small sound. Her hand went to her mouth. "I should have run in," Caleb said. "Should have helped her. But I froze, just stood there outside that door, watching." Tobias came down the stairs, slow, stood over Iris's body. Then he looked up and saw me through the open door, looked right at me. He walked outside. "Calm as you please. like he'd just finished a normal day's work. Caleb stood up, walked to the window, looked out at nothing. Tobias told me if I said one word to anyone, he'd kill my wife, he said. He'd kill my boys. He'd burn my house down while we slept. And he said it so calm, so matter-of-fact that I knew he meant every word. What did you do? I kept my mouth shut. Quit the next day. Moved my family 2 counties over. Lived in fear for 10 years that Tobias would find us anyway. That one day I'd wake up to find my house on fire. But he didn't come. No. Caleb turned back to face us. But my wife and boys died anyway. Fever took them all in the winter of '78. 3 graves I dug with my own hands. He sat back down at the table. I traded my soul to protect my family, he said, and they died anyway, so I came back here, to the place where I made my choice. And I've been living with it every day since. Lydia reached across the table, put her hand on Caleb's weathered one. It's not too late, she said. You can help me now, please. Caleb looked at her hand on his, then at her face. He saw something there that made his eyes water. You look like your mother, he said. She had that same determination. Will you testify? I asked. Will you tell the sheriff what you saw? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. The only sound was rain starting to patter on the roof. Yes, he finally said. I'll testify. I should have done it 18 years ago. Maybe it's time to stop being a coward. Lydia squeezed his hand. Thank you. We talked for another hour. Caleb told us everything he remembered about that night. Details that had stayed sharp in his memory even after all these years. The color of Iris's dress, the sound of her scream, the look on Tobias's face, cold, empty, like he'd just put down a lame horse. When the rain let up enough to travel, we got ready to leave. Caleb walked us to our horses. Be careful, he said. Tobias knows I'm still alive, knows I'm the only one who saw. If he finds out you've been here, he'll come. We'll be careful, I said. But even as I said it, I heard horses approaching fast on the road. 3 riders came around the bend. Even from a distance, I recognized the man in front, Tobias Fletcher. He pulled up hard in Caleb's yard. The 2 men with him were hired guns. I recognized them from the saloons in town, men who'd do anything for money. Tobias swung down from his saddle. His eyes went from me to Lydia to Caleb and back again. A cold smile spread across his face. Well now, he said, ain't this cozy? My daughter, the man who stole her, and the old fool who thought he could hide. We're leaving, Tobias, I said. We don't want trouble. Too late for that. Tobias took a step forward. You took something that belongs to me, Garrison. I want it back. She's not property, I said. Tobias ignored me, looked at Caleb. You told them, didn't you, old man, about Iris? After all these years of keeping your mouth shut, you finally grew a spine. Caleb stood straighter, looked Tobias in the eye. I'm going to tell everyone, he said. I'm going to tell the sheriff, the judge, anyone who'll listen, what you did to Iris, what you are. Tobias's smile disappeared. No, he said, you're not. He nodded to one of the hired guns. The man pulled his pistol. I stepped in front of Caleb. So did Lydia. You shoot him, I said. You'll have to shoot us too. And that's murder in front of witnesses. Tobias considered this. Then he laughed. You think I care about witnesses? He gestured to the empty prairie around us. Who's going to know what happens out here? I will. The voice came from behind Tobias. We all turned. Sheriff Marcus Donovan sat on his horse at the edge of the yard. He had his rifle across his saddle, pointed generally in Tobias's direction. Behind him were 2 deputies. Marcus must have followed us, or maybe Adelaide had sent word. Either way, I'd never been so glad to see anyone in my life. Tobias's face went dark. His hand moved toward his own gun. I wouldn't, Marcus said. His voice was calm but hard. You're already facing questions about property fraud, Tobias. You want to add assault to that? Maybe murder? Tobias's hand stopped, but his eyes stayed locked on Marcus. You got nothing on me, he said. We got plenty. Marcus urged his horse forward. We got forged documents. We got testimony from Adelaide Mercer, and now we got an eyewitness to Iris Caldwell's murder. Tobias looked at Caleb, then at me, then at Lydia. Something changed in his face. The mask slipped. For just a second, I saw not anger, but desperation. A man watching everything he'd built come crashing down. "You don't understand," Tobias said. His voice had changed, lost its edge. "None of you understand." "Understand what?" Marcus asked. Tobias looked at Lydia, really looked at her. "I did everything to survive," he said. "Everything to never be weak like my mother was. My father beat her every day of her life. Beat me too. Told me weakness was death. Told me only the strong deserve to live." His hands were shaking now. "So I made myself strong, took what I needed, did what I had to do, because that's what men do. That's what my father taught me." I stepped toward him. "But you became exactly what you hated," I said. "You became your father, a man who hurts the people weaker than him, a man who uses fear and violence to control." Tobias looked at me, and for one brief moment I saw understanding flash in his eyes, recognition of the truth. Then it was gone, replaced by rage. "I'm nothing like him," Tobias shouted. "Nothing." He grabbed for his gun. Everything happened fast. Marcus's rifle came up. The deputies drew their weapons. I shoved Lydia behind me, but Tobias didn't fire. His hand just hung there, gripping the pistol, shaking. Then Lydia stepped out from behind me, walked right up to her father, stood inches from him. "You already lost," she said quietly. "The land is mine. Mother left it to me, and I'll never give it to you. I'll burn it before I let you have it." Tobias stared at his daughter, the girl he'd locked in a stable, the girl he'd tried to break. And she didn't flinch, didn't look away. Finally, Tobias let go of his gun, let it fall into the mud. His shoulders slumped. Marcus and the deputies moved in, put irons on Tobias's wrists, on the 2 hired guns as well. "Tobias Fletcher," Marcus said, "you're under arrest for the murder of Iris Caldwell, the suspected murder of Helen Fletcher, property fraud, and assault. You got anything to say?" Tobias didn't answer, just stood there in the rain, looking at Lydia. "I tried to make you strong," he said to her. His voice was hollow. "Empty." "You made me afraid," Lydia said. "But Mr. Garrison taught me something. He taught me that strength isn't about control. It's about choosing kindness when you could choose cruelty. It's about protecting the weak instead of preying on them." She stepped back. "I'll never be like you," she said, "and that's the only strength that matters." Marcus led Tobias to a horse, helped him mount with his hands bound. The whole time Tobias kept his eyes on Lydia. As they rode away, Tobias called back one more time, "This ain't over." But his voice had no conviction, no power. It was the voice of a man who knew he'd lost. We stood in Caleb's yard and watched them disappear down the road. The rain had stopped. The sky was clearing to the west, showing patches of blue. Caleb put a hand on Lydia's shoulder. "Your mother would be proud," he said. Lydia nodded. Tears finally came. Not tears of fear or pain. Tears of release. I put my arm around her. She leaned into me and cried while Caleb and I stood there, 2 men who'd failed in the past, finally doing something right. That night, back at the ranch, I sat on the porch and watched the stars come out. Inside, Lydia was sleeping. For the first time since she'd come here, I heard no footsteps pacing the floor, no restless movement, just peace. Marcus had taken Tobias to jail in Abilene. There'd be a trial. Caleb would testify. Adelaide would present her evidence. Justice would take its slow, grinding course. But tonight, at least, Lydia was safe. I thought about Rachel, about her journal, about the promise I'd made. "I'm keeping it," I told the night sky. "I'm protecting her, just like you asked." The wind moved through the grass. Somewhere in the darkness, a night bird called. And I sat there on my porch, feeling something I hadn't felt in 4 years. Hope. 3 days had passed since Tobias Fletcher was arrested. 3 days of relative quiet that felt too fragile to trust. Like the calm before a storm that was still gathering strength somewhere beyond the horizon. Sheriff Marcus Donovan had sent word that the trial would be held in 2 weeks. Judge Benjamin Harrow was coming from the territorial capital to preside. It would be a public hearing at the courthouse in Abilene. The whole county would be watching. Lydia spent those 3 days helping me prepare. We rode into town and met with Adelaide Mercer, going over the forged documents again and again. We visited Caleb Whitmore, helping him remember every detail of that night 18 years ago. Marcus worked tirelessly, building the case piece by piece. But something gnawed at me, a feeling I couldn't shake. Tobias Fletcher was sitting in a jail cell, but he wasn't finished. Men like him never gave up easy. They always had one more card to play. On the 4th night, I couldn't sleep. I went to my study and lit the lamp. Rachel's journal sat on the desk where I'd left it. I'd read it through twice now, but something made me open it again. I turned to the last entry, the one written the day before she died. But this time, I looked closer at the page, held it up to the light. There was something underneath the final paragraph, faint marks, like Rachel had written something, then tried to erase it. I tilted the page, angled it different ways until the ghost words became visible. If something happens to me, the house key is under the 3rd floorboard in the pantry. Everything you need to know is there. My heart started pounding. I got up and went to the kitchen, opened the pantry door, counted the floorboards from the left. The 3rd one was loose. I pried it up with my knife. Underneath was a small metal box. No lock, just a simple latch. Inside were letters, maybe 20 of them, all addressed to Rachel, all from Helen Fletcher. I carried them back to my study and read them one by one. The letters painted a picture of 2 women trapped in similar nightmares. Helen wrote about Tobias's violence, his drinking, his obsession with land and money, how he'd forced her to sign over the boarding house she'd inherited from her first husband, how he'd threatened Lydia when Helen tried to resist. But it was the final letter, dated a week before Helen died, that made my blood run cold. "Dear Rachel," Helen had written, "I know what Tobias is planning. I heard him talking to a man last night. They spoke about accidents, about how easy it is for women to fall downstairs, about how widowers with property attract sympathy and opportunities. Rachel, I believe my husband plans to kill me, and I believe he plans to kill you too. We both have land he wants. We both stand in his way. I am writing this as insurance. If something happens to me, please take this letter to the sheriff. Tell him Tobias Fletcher is a murderer. Tell him to protect Lydia and protect yourself. Your friend in fear and hope, Helen Fletcher." The letter was dated April 10, 1879. Helen died on April 17, 1879. 2 months later, on June 15 that same year, Rachel followed. 1 week after Helen wrote this letter, she was dead. 2 months later, Rachel followed. And Rachel had hidden these letters instead of taking them to the sheriff. Had she been too afraid? Had she not believed Helen? Or had she simply run out of time? I sat there in my study, holding evidence that Tobias Fletcher had planned my wife's murder months in advance, that her death wasn't impulse or accident. It was premeditated, calculated. I put my head in my hands and finally let myself cry, really cry. For the first time since I'd found Rachel at the bottom of our stairs. I cried for her fear, for her silence, for the fact that she'd known danger was coming and had faced it alone. I cried for all the things I should have seen and didn't, all the questions I should have asked and didn't, all the ways I'd failed the woman I'd loved. The study door opened quietly. Lydia stood there in her nightgown, hair loose around her shoulders. "Mr. Garrison, are you all right?" I couldn't speak, just shook my head. She came in and sat down in the chair across from my desk. Didn't touch me, didn't try to comfort me with empty words, just sat there, present. After a while I told her about the letters, about what Helen had written, about how Rachel had known and tried to protect both of them. Lydia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that broke my heart all over again. They tried to save each other, but they couldn't save themselves because they were alone. That's what my father counted on. Our silence, our isolation, Our fear that no one would believe us. She stood up and came around the desk, put her hand on my shoulder. But Mr. Garrison, you believed me. Sheriff Donovan believed me. Adelaide and Caleb believed me. We're not alone anymore. And that's why my father will lose. I looked up at her, this young woman who'd survived things that would have broken most people, who'd found strength not in silence, but in speaking. You're right, I said. We're not alone. I gathered the letters and put them in an envelope. Tomorrow I'd take them to Marcus. They were the final piece of evidence we needed. Proof that Tobias had planned these murders, that they weren't accidents at all. But first, there was something I needed to do. I stood up and walked to the door. Lydia followed me. We went outside into the night. The 3 graves on the hill were dark shapes against the star-filled sky. I walked up there with Lydia beside me. I stood before Rachel's headstone. Lydia stood before her mother's grave, which we'd moved here last week, a proper burial with a proper stone. Helen Fletcher finally resting in peace instead of the pauper's cemetery where Tobias had put her. Rachel, I said to the stone, to the night, to whatever part of her might still hear me. I found your letters. I found the truth. And I promise you I'm going to make sure Tobias pays for what he did. To you, to Helen, to all of them. Beside me, Lydia spoke softly to her mother's grave. Mama, she said, I didn't sign the papers. I never will. The land stays ours, and I'm going to use it to help other women. So they don't have to be afraid like we were. We stood there together in the dark, 2 broken people learning to be whole, 2 survivors making promises to the dead. The wind moved through the grass. The stars wheeled overhead, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote sang its lonely song. The next morning, I took the letters to Marcus. He read them in his office, his face getting darker with each page. This is it, he said when he finished. This proves premeditation, proves Tobias planned Helen's murder at least a week in advance, and probably Rachel's too. Will it be enough for the judge? Marcus nodded slowly. Combined with Caleb's eyewitness testimony about Iris, Adelaide's evidence of fraud, and these letters? Yes, it should be enough. He looked at me across his desk. Nate, you need to prepare yourself. This trial is going to be hard. Tobias's lawyer will try to discredit everyone. We'll say Helen was hysterical, that Rachel was confused, that Caleb's memory can't be trusted after 18 years. I'm prepared, and Lydia will have to testify about what Tobias did to her. In front of the whole town, she's prepared too. Marcus stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the street. There's something else, he said. Judge Harrow arrived yesterday. I spoke with him this morning. And? Marcus turned back to me. His face was troubled. Judge Harrow is a fair man, honest. But his son, Thomas Harrow, owes Tobias money, gambling debts, about $2,000. My stomach sank. Tobias will use that. He already has. Tobias sent word from his cell. If the judge doesn't help him, he'll call in Thomas's debts. The boy will go to prison. So we have a judge who might be compromised. Marcus shook his head. I don't think Harrow will bend. I've known him 20 years. He's a man of principle. But the pressure will be there, and Tobias knows it. Then we make our case so strong that Harrow has no choice but to convict. Marcus smiled grimly. That's exactly what we're going to do. The trial was set for the following Monday, 5 days away. 5 days to prepare, to gather our witnesses, to make sure nothing was left to chance. But on Friday night, 3 days before the trial, everything changed. I woke to the sound of breaking glass, sat up in bed, heart pounding, grabbed the rifle I kept by the door. Lydia's scream cut through the house. I ran to her room. The door was open. The window was broken. Lydia was gone. On her bed was a note, written in rough block letters. You want the girl back. Drop the charges. You got until Sunday noon. Come alone to the old mill on Kettle Creek. No sheriff, no witnesses, or she dies like her mother. No signature. But I knew who wrote it, knew who'd sent men to take Lydia in the night. Tobias Fletcher was making his final play. I rode hard for town in the dark. Found Marcus at his house, showed him the note. He read it and cursed. Tobias is still in jail. He must have sent word to men loyal to him, hired guns. We have to find her. Marcus was already pulling on his boots, strapping on his gun belt. The old mill on Kettle Creek is about 15 miles north, abandoned for 10 years. Good place for a hostage situation. So we go in with force, deputize some men, surround the place. Marcus shook his head. If we do that, they'll kill her. You read the note. They want you to come alone. I'm not dropping the charges, I know. Marcus grabbed his rifle. So here's what we're going to do. We spent the next hour planning. Marcus would gather men he trusted, position them around the mill before dawn, stay hidden. I'd ride in at noon like the note demanded, alone, unarmed, at least visibly. When I had Lydia, when I knew she was safe, Marcus and his men would move in. It was risky. Plenty could go wrong. But it was the only chance we had. As the sun started to rise, I rode back to my ranch. I had 12 hours until noon. 12 hours to prepare myself for what was coming. I went to my study, took out paper and pen, wrote a letter to Lydia in case things went bad, told her everything I should have said when she was here, about how brave she was, how strong, how she'd taught me that silence wasn't the same as peace, that speaking up, even when your voice shook, was the truest form of courage. I sealed the letter and left it on my desk. Then I went to the hill, stood before the 3 graves, Rachel, Helen, and the small stones for the babies I'd never known. I don't know if I'm coming back, I told them. But if I don't, at least I'll have done one thing right. At least I'll have tried to save her. The sun climbed higher, the hours passed, and at 11:30 I saddled Duke and started the long ride north to Kettle Creek, to whatever waited for me there. The old mill sat on the bank of Kettle Creek like a broken tooth, 3 stories of weathered wood and crumbling stone. The water wheel hadn't turned in a decade. Windows gaped empty. The whole structure leaned slightly to the east, like a strong wind might finally knock it over. I rode up slow, hands visible, no rifle, just me and Duke in the noonday sun. 2 men stepped out from the mill, both armed, both faces I recognized from the saloons in town, hard men who'd do anything for money. "That's far enough," one of them called. "Get down off the horse." I dismounted, kept my hands where they could see them. "Where's Lydia?" I asked. "Inside, safe, for now. I want to see her." The second man laughed. "You ain't in a position to make demands, Garrison." But he jerked his head toward the mill. I walked forward. They flanked me, guns drawn. We went through the sagging doorway into the shadowed interior. The inside of the mill was a maze of broken machinery and rotting timbers. Flour dust still coated everything, thick as snow. Our footsteps echoed in the empty space. They led me upstairs, to the second floor where the millstone sat cold and silent. Lydia was tied to a wooden post in the center of the room. Her hands were bound behind her. Her face was bruised, but her eyes were fierce, unbroken. "Mr. Garrison," she said, "you shouldn't have come. Didn't have much choice." One of the gunmen prodded me with his rifle. "Sit down, against that wall." I sat. They tied my hands in front of me, not behind like Lydia. They wanted me to be able to sign papers if it came to that. "Now we wait," the first gunman said. "Boss said he'd send word about what happens next. How long? However long it takes." They settled in, one by the door, one by the window, watching us, waiting. The afternoon sun slanted through the broken windows. Dust motes danced in the light. The creek burbled outside, indifferent to human drama. Lydia and I didn't speak, didn't need to. We just looked at each other across the dusty floor. And I tried to tell her with my eyes what I couldn't say with words, that I was sorry, that I'd find a way out of this, that she wasn't alone. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky. The gunmen got restless, started drinking from a bottle they'd brought, gambling with dice to pass the time. As dusk approached, one of them went downstairs to check on the horses. The moment he was gone, Lydia spoke quietly. "There are only 2 of them," she said, "and they're getting drunk." I nodded. "Noticed," I can slip these ropes." She moved her hands slightly. They tied them loose. "Didn't think I'd try anything. When the time comes, you run. Don't wait for me." Lydia's jaw set. "I'm not leaving you." Before I could argue, we heard horses outside, multiple riders, coming fast. The gunman by the window looked out and cursed. "It's the sheriff, and he brought men. The one who'd gone downstairs came running back up. We got company. At least 6 riders. They got the place surrounded." I felt relief wash through me. Marcus had made his move, but then I heard another horse, coming from the south. A single rider, moving slow. The rider came into view through the window. Even from a distance, even in the failing light, I recognized him. Tobias Fletcher. He was supposed to be in jail. But here he was, riding free, a rifle across his saddle. "How did he get out?" I asked. The gunmen looked at each other, then at Tobias approaching. Tobias was released during a prisoner transfer this morning. Someone bribed the guards to let him go. Made it look like an escape, but it wasn't. They freed him on purpose. "We think it was Thomas Harrow, the judge's son, using his father's money," one of them said. "Used his father's name to spring him. Tobias called in the debt. So the judge's son had betrayed his father's principles to save himself from prison. And now Tobias was free, armed, dangerous." This had just gotten a lot more complicated. Tobias rode right up to the mill, dismounted, walked inside like he owned the place. His footsteps echoed on the stairs. Then he was standing in the doorway of the second floor, silhouetted against the dying light. He looked older than the last time I'd seen him, thinner, worn down by 3 days in jail. But his eyes still had that cold calculation. "Well now," he said, "quite the gathering." He walked over to Lydia, looked down at her. "Hello, daughter." Lydia stared up at him, no fear in her face, just contempt. "I'll never sign," she said. "You can kill me like you killed Mother, like you killed Mrs. Garrison, but I'll never give you that land." Tobias smiled. It was not a kind smile. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm not here for the land anymore." "Then why are you here?" Tobias looked at me, then at the window where Marcus and his men were visible in the distance. "Because," Tobias said, "if I'm going down, I'm taking everyone with me. You, Garrison, the sheriff, all the people who think they're better than me." "He's lost his mind," one of the gunmen muttered. Tobias spun on him. His hand went to his gun. "You got something to say?" The gunman raised his hands. "No, sir, nothing." Tobias turned back to us. The last light of day was fading. Shadows filled the corners of the mill. "You all think I'm a monster," Tobias said. His voice had a strange quality now, almost plaintive. "But I'm just a man who learned to survive. My father beat me every day of my childhood, told me the weak deserved to suffer, that only the strong matter. So I made myself strong. I took what I needed, did what I had to do." He looked at Lydia. "I never wanted to hurt you. I just wanted you to understand, to be strong like me." "You're not strong," Lydia said quietly. "You're broken, and you break everyone around you because you can't stand to see whole people, because they remind you of everything you'll never be." Tobias flinched like she'd struck him. For a moment, just a moment, I saw past his mask, saw the scared child he'd once been, the boy who'd learned that violence was the only language that mattered. But then the moment passed. The mask slammed back into place. Tobias raised his rifle, pointed it at Lydia. "Then I'll break you one last time," he said. Everything happened at once. Lydia slipped her bonds like she'd said she could, rolled away from the post. I lunged forward, hands still tied, and hit Tobias in the legs. We went down together in a tangle. The gunmen reached for their weapons, and outside Marcus shouted commands. His men came rushing toward the mill. Gunfire erupted, deafening, in the enclosed space. The 2 hired guns fired at the doorway. Marcus's deputies fired back. Bullets splintered wood, shattered what was left of the windows. I wrestled with Tobias on the floor, tried to pin him down. But my hands were tied and he was desperate. He hit me in the face with the rifle butt. Stars exploded in my vision. Lydia grabbed a piece of broken timber and swung it at one of the gunmen, caught him across the shoulders. He went down hard. The other gunman turned his pistol toward her. "No!" I shouted. But Marcus was faster. His rifle cracked once from the doorway. The gunman dropped. Tobias scrambled to his feet, grabbed Lydia, put his gun to her head. "Everyone stop!" he screamed. "Everyone stop or I kill her!" The gunfire ceased. Marcus stood in the doorway, rifle raised. His deputies flanked him. The two hired guns were down, one dead, one wounded and not moving. It was just Tobias now, holding his daughter, the gun pressed against her temple. "Let her go, Tobias," Marcus said. "It's over. It's not over." Tobias's voice was ragged, desperate. "I still have her. I still have something you want. Killing her won't save you. Maybe not, but it'll hurt all of you. And right now, that's enough." He started backing toward the far window, the one that overlooked the creek, dragging Lydia with him. "Don't do this," I said. I got to my feet, hands still bound. "Tobias, look at me." He did. "You're right," I said. "Your father made you this way. He taught you that violence was strength, that controlling others was surviving. But you're wrong about one thing. You're not strong. You never were." Tobias's face twisted with rage. "Real strength," I continued, "is choosing to be different than your father. It's breaking the cycle instead of repeating it. It's being kind when you were taught cruelty. Lydia has that strength. She's stronger than you'll ever be, because she chose to speak instead of staying silent. She chose to stand instead of breaking." Tobias looked down at his daughter, really looked at her, and Lydia looked back. "I forgive you," she said quietly. Those 3 words hit Tobias harder than any bullet could have. His hand started shaking. The gun wavered. "I forgive you for what you did to me, for what you did to Mother, because holding on to hate would make me like you, and I refuse to be like you." Tobias's face crumpled. The gun dropped from Lydia's head. For just a second, I thought he might surrender, might finally let go. But then he did something I didn't expect. He stepped backward, through the window, into empty air. I lunged forward, so did Marcus. But we were too late. Tobias fell 3 stories into Kettle Creek below, hit the water with a splash that echoed in the gathering dark. We ran to the window, looked down. The creek wasn't deep, but it was fast. Tobias's body tumbled in the current, didn't move, didn't struggle. Marcus and 2 deputies rushed downstairs and out to the creek. They pulled Tobias out, laid him on the bank. He was still breathing, barely. Blood pooled beneath him. Internal injuries. We all knew he had minutes, maybe less. His eyes found Lydia. His lips formed words, though no sound came. But Lydia understood. "I'm sorry," she whispered back. Reading his lips, Marcus sent a deputy for the doctor, but we all knew Tobias Fletcher wouldn't see another sunrise. I cut the ropes from my hands and helped Lydia down the stairs. Outside, we stood on the creek bank while Marcus and his men worked. Tobias looked up at the sky. At the first stars appearing in the dusk, his lips moved. Lydia knelt beside him, took his hand. "I'm sorry," Tobias whispered. His voice was barely audible. "I'm so sorry." "I know," Lydia said. Tears streamed down her face. "I know I tried to be strong, but I was just afraid all the time. It's over now. You can rest." Tobias looked at his daughter, really saw her, maybe for the first time in her life. "You're better than me," he said. "Better than I ever was." Those were his last words. Tobias Fletcher died there on the bank of Kettle Creek as the stars came out. Died with his daughter's hand in his. Died finally acknowledging the truth he'd spent a lifetime running from. That strength wasn't about control, it was about letting go. The trial still happened, 2 weeks later as scheduled. Judge Harrow presided with a heavy heart. His son Thomas sat in the gallery, facing charges of aiding an escape. But the trial wasn't about Tobias anymore. He was dead, buried in the potter's field on the edge of town. The trial was about the others, about Iris and Ruth and Helen and Rachel, about giving them voices when they could no longer speak for themselves. Caleb Whitmore testified, told his story with tears in his eyes. Adelaide Mercer presented her evidence, document after document showing Tobias's pattern of fraud and murder. And Lydia Fletcher stood in front of that courtroom and told her story. About the chain, about the stable, about the 3 marks on the post, about her mother's fear and her mother's death. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled, people standing in the back. The whole county had come to hear. And when Lydia finished, when she stepped down from the witness stand, something happened that I'll never forget. 3 women stood up in the gallery. The first was Martha Hale, a widow from town. She testified that Tobias had tried to force her to sell her land 5 years ago, had threatened to burn her house down when she refused. The second was Emma Dalton, who'd worked as a maid in Tobias's house. She testified about the bruises she'd seen on Helen, about the screams she'd heard, about being fired when she asked too many questions. The third was Ruth Caldwell, Iris's mother. She'd stayed silent for 18 years, but now, finally, she spoke about her daughter, about the girl Iris had been, about the woman she'd never got to become. One by one, these women told their truths, broke their silences, spoke for themselves and for those who couldn't speak. And the courtroom listened. Judge Harrow delivered his verdict with a heavy voice. He declared Tobias Fletcher posthumously guilty of 3 murders and multiple counts of fraud. He ordered all property illegally obtained to be returned to the rightful heirs. He also did something unexpected. He stepped down from the bench and publicly apologized for his son's role in Tobias's escape. Then he announced his retirement, said he couldn't serve justice after his family had compromised it. It was a moment of accountability, of a man choosing principle over pride. The land by the river, Helen's land, was officially deeded to Lydia, along with restitution from Tobias's estate for the years of abuse and unlawful imprisonment. Lydia stood outside the courthouse after the verdict. Adelaide and Caleb stood with her, Marcus too, and me. "What will you do now?" Adelaide asked her. Lydia looked out at the town, at the people who'd listened to her story, who'd believed her. "I'm going to build a school," she said, "on my mother's land, a place where girls can learn, where women can come if they need help, a place where no one has to be silent." She turned to me. "Will you help me?" I smiled every day. The trial proceeded 2 weeks later as scheduled. Even though Tobias was dead, the court heard all testimony, not to convict a corpse, but to give the victims their day in court, to let their voices be heard. Judge Harrow presided with visible pain. His son Thomas sat in the defendant's chair, charged with bribing prison guards and aiding an escape. The evidence was overwhelming. Thomas was sentenced to 2 years. Before sentencing, Judge Harrow addressed the court. He announced his retirement effective immediately, said he'd failed in his duty as both judge and father, that his legacy would be tainted by his son's actions, but he also made one final ruling. He declared all of Tobias Fletcher's property seizures null and void, returned the land to the rightful heirs, established a victim compensation fund from Tobias's estate. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was something. 3 months later, on a quiet Sunday morning, Lydia and I were married in the small church in Abilene. Marcus and Adelaide stood as witnesses. Caleb walked Lydia down the aisle, tears in his eyes. We didn't have a honeymoon, just went back to the ranch and kept working, building, planning for the school. 1 year later, the school opened. We called it Helen's Hope. It stood on the riverbank, a simple building of wood and stone. Large windows letting in light. A sign over the door with Helen Fletcher's name. 20 students enrolled that first year, daughters of ranchers and shopkeepers, girls who wanted to read and write and learn, women who'd fled bad situations and needed a safe place to start over. Lydia taught them. Adelaide helped. Even Caleb came by to teach gardening and share his stories. And I was there too, helping however I could, building desks, mending fences, teaching the older students how to care for horses. Marcus visited often. He and Adelaide had grown close. There was talk they might marry. 2 people who'd lived with regret, finding unexpected second chances. Judge Harrow retired to a small farm. His son Thomas served 6 months for aiding Tobias's escape, then worked to make amends. He volunteered at the school, taught mathematics, tried to be better than he'd been. Even the town changed. Women started speaking up more about injustices, about violence they'd endured in silence, and people started listening. Not everyone, not all at once, but enough to matter. On the 1-year anniversary of the school's opening, Lydia and I walked up the hill to the graves. 4 headstones stood there now: Rachel, Helen, and 2 small stones for the babies. We'd added a 5th stone, too, a memorial for Iris Caldwell. Her actual grave was in another cemetery, but we wanted her remembered here, among the others who'd suffered, who'd died, who'd finally found peace. Lydia placed flowers on each grave, wild prairie roses that grew by the river. "Thank you," she said to them, "to all of you, for being brave enough to hope, to try, even when the world made it hard." I stood beside her, put my hand on her shoulder. We'd gotten married 3 months ago. A quiet ceremony with just Marcus and Adelaide and Caleb as witnesses. It felt right. 2 broken people who'd learned to be whole together. Not because we'd fixed each other, but because we'd given each other space to heal. "Do you think they can see us?" Lydia asked. "Your wife and my mother." "I think so. Do you think they're proud?" I looked at the school down the hill, at the students working in the garden, at the smoke rising from the chimney, at all the life and hope that had grown from their deaths. "Yes," I said, "I think they're very proud." We stood there as the sun set, as the sky turned gold and orange and purple, as the stars began to appear, and I thought about silence, about how it had shaped so many lives, how it had allowed evil to flourish, how it had cost so much, but also about how silence could be broken, how voices raised together could change things, how speaking truth, even when it shook your voice, was the bravest thing anyone could do. Lydia and I walked back down the hill, hand in hand, back to our home, to the life we were building together. Behind us, the graves stood quiet on the hill, no longer markers of failure and regret, but monuments to courage, to the women who'd tried to save each other, who'd left clues and letters and journals for those who came after, who'd refused to let their stories die in silence, and who, in the end, had changed everything. The wind moved through the grass. The creek sang its endless song, and somewhere in the school a young girl laughed. Life continuing, hope persisting, silence finally, blessedly, broken. 3 marks on a post had once counted suffering, but now a school full of voices counted something else: possibility, future, freedom. And that made all the difference. The end.